All right, welcome. Today we're going to go ahead and talk about persuasion and argumentation through logos, ethos, and pathos. You will have a notebook assignment with this. It will be to take down in the last 18 slides of this and make note of what types of appeals are being used in each of those 18 slides. First of all, it's probably important that we go ahead and give proper credit where it's due here. This PowerPoint and large portions of it were taken from the following websites, one from Pflugerville Independent School District, as well as one other from CentrusClassWeebly.com. I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel here. This stuff's been around for a long time, so I thank them for their work. We'll go ahead and move on. This stuff's been around for such a long time, in fact, that Aristotle is kind of where it finds its beginnings at. Aristotle was an educational product of the school of thought of Plato, wherein he basically produced some of the world's greatest philosophers and thinkers. He wrote on things all the way from logic, philosophy, ethics, physics, biology, psychology, politics, and rhetoric. And rhetoric is kind of what he lumped what we're going to talk about today into. Rhetoric, he said, was the art of persuasion. The goal of that persuasion being to change others' point of view or to make others act. Now, the different types of appeals that he said that we used to do that haven't really changed much over the last couple, thousands years. The first he said was logos, which is an appeal to logic. The second was ethos, an appeal to ethics or image, and the final was pathos, an appeal to emotion and passion. So it's important to understand logos, ethos, and pathos for a couple of reasons. If you're going to be effective at writing arguments, you do need to mix in some elements of persuasion in order to help people see eye to eye with you. The language you use is key in helping people change the point of view, as well as motivating people to act differently or to take action. Now, these are important skills that you're going to need in your real life world, no matter what you do. So, that having been said, it's also important for you to understand these things, because one of the best tools I can give you is a built-in bull manure detector, for lack of better words. There is a lot of BS out there in the world, and people will try to feed you a line to get you to do things and to get you to believe things that may not necessarily be true or in your best interest. Now it's up to you to be able to decipher, hey, is this good for me or is this bad for me? And understanding logos, ethos, and pathos can definitely help you do that. So logos is the first thing we'll talk about. It's an argument based on facts, evidence, and reasoning. Logos means that we're appealing to the reader's sense of what makes sense. I know that's a little bit redundant, but that's what it is. Logos-based arguments or require evidence, and it's important to ask yourself, is the evidence being provided logical and appropriate, and is the reasoning that they're providing make sense? Also, you can ask yourself whether or not the evidence is requiring you to think deductively or inductively. And we'll talk about those two in just a second. Deductive logic takes a generalization and cites a specific case then related to that generalization, and finally ends up with a conclusion based on those two things gathered together. That's a little bit convoluted, but if we scroll down to the next screen, I think it'll help kind of clear it up. Aristotle gave this example when he said, all men are mortal, and Socrates is a man, thus Socrates is mortal. Another example that we could draw from, if we were to think of our own reading in Caesar, is killing another human being is dishonorable. Brutus killed another human being, thus Brutus is dishonorable. Next, we'll go ahead and take a look here at inductive logic. Inductive reasoning begins with several specific, very specific pieces of evidence, and then draws on to a larger general conclusion based upon that evidence. So this is an example that would be reversed, doing with men and mortality. Here Socrates says that Aristotle says Socrates is mortal, Plato is mortal, and Pythagoras is mortal. We've skipped a step in the middle where we'd have to say Socrates, Plato, and Pythagoras are all men, thus all men are mortal. Another example from Caesar might include something like this, that Cassius lied to kill Caesar, Casca and Metellus Cimber deceived to kill Caesar, and lying and deceiving are dishonorable acts. Thus, the men who participated in the plot to kill Caesar were dishonorable. Those would be examples of logic that you could use inductively. Now, inductive logic is a little bit weaker than deductive logic. Deductive logic, I like to think of Sherlock Holmes. He gathers all these, he uses kind of these general principles and then uses it to come to a very specific conclusion of who the murderer is or who committed the crime. I think that's a kind of the kind of way that I think of deductive reasoning and how I differ from or differentiate it from inductive reasoning. We need to be careful when we talk about logos, when we're using logos-based appeals, that we're not looking at logical fallacies. Oftentimes, the logic can be abused. One example, and perhaps one of the most popular, is post hoc ergo propter hoc. Basically, it's the conclusion that assumes that if A occurred after B, then B must have caused A. For example, I went to school and now I'm sick, therefore school makes me sick. Not necessarily true. For example, maybe it's the fact that you were hanging around your friend who had the flu over the weekend, or maybe you kissed somebody who had mono, or any other number of reasons. But to say that school made you sick is definitely a logical conclusion that's a little bit of a leap. Let's scroll on downward to the next slide and talk a little bit about ethos. Now, ethos is an argument based on character, and essentially ethos means that we're establishing ourselves as a credible speaker to our audience, and we're doing that with our speech, with the way we speak, and the credentials that we bring to the table and offer to them. Basically, we're saying, I'm an ethical expert, thus listen to what I'm saying. Aristotle made an interesting point here where he said that we tend to believe people that are fair-minded to a greater extent than we do others, and also that we should basically draw ethos or credibility from things that we do specifically in our speech. Okay. Ethos questions we might ask ourselves is, what does the author do to present themselves as a credible option or source? Do they give direct information? Does the author respect their audience? How do they show that? Do they have a tone that would indicate a lack of respect? Do they have a bias that they're pushing? Are they careful and clean in their presentation? And is the author honest? Perhaps one of the biggest things that we can do as young writers to improve our own sense of ethos is to have good grammar, to choose our words carefully and wisely in order to help promote our own intelligence level and establish ethos with our audience. Excuse me. Pathos is the next one. That's an argument based on feelings. Now, pathos means appealing to readers' emotions and feelings through strong language and strong examples that are emotionally charged. Now, pathos alone is not an entire way to win the whole argument. It's interesting. I've learned it through years of marriage that my wife sees things very much through a pathos basis, whereas I am much more of a logos basis. So we now both know that when we want to kind of convince each other of something or get each other to do something, that the best way is to about it with a good combination of logos and pathos. Thus it meets our needs for what we want and also helps convince the other person. When we base our arguments solely on pathos, we can run into issues. Emotion alone is not sufficient reason for action or change. Emotions can change with the day or any other number of factors, so it's important that we understand that those aren't sufficient to change. Pathos should be used in conjunction with logos and ethos in order to reach our audience. It makes logos and ethos more powerful when we can connect emotionally with them also. So things to think about when we're thinking about pathos and its role in writing. How does the text make us feel? Do the elements in the text function? How do they function to make us feel that way? What is the tone? Do words, specific words or phrases, evoke a strong emotional response? Does the author use metaphors to evoke certain emotions? Does the author manipulate us unfairly by evoking these emotions? Are the examples used by the author logically relevant but emotionally packed? What emotions do the specific examples evoke? So those would be questions we can ask ourselves about pathos. Going onward, let's talk now about symbols that are used to explain logos, ethos, and pathos. The symbol for logos is the head, the symbol for ethos is the hand, and the symbol for pathos is the heart, and I'll explain those in brief in just a minute. Logos is obviously the head because that's where the brain is, and that's where we make sense of things that are logical. Ethos is the hand. I like to think of it both as the handshake as well as the hand placed on an object and raised at the square in order to attest that you swear to do something. And then finally, the heart for pathos, which is, the center of emotion in human beings, at least metaphorically speaking. And so that is the symbol for that. Let's look for examples of logos, ethos, and pathos in writing. This first example is written by Ian Ayres, and she uses the logical pattern of precedence in order to argue that a situation should be changed, and she does a good job basically helping the reader kind of think through why it makes sense to change this pattern. All right, and this is her writing. We don't have single-sex toilets at home, and we don't need them at the office. Then there's also a small question of efficiency. I see my male colleagues waiting in line to use the men's room when the women's toilet is unoccupied, which is precisely why Delta Airlines doesn't label those 2 bathrooms at the back of the plane as being solely for men and women. It just wouldn't fly. Nice use of the pun there. All right. The University of Chicago just got 10 single-use restrooms on campus designated gender neutral. It's time Yale followed suit. And this is not just an academic problem. There are tens of thousands of single-use toilets at workplaces and public spaces throughout the nation that are wrong-headedly designed for single sex. All these single-use toilets should stop discriminating. They should be open to all on a first-come, first-lock basis. So, interesting argument there. But the author does a great job of using kind of precedents. It's been done here before. It's been done here before. It's been done here before. Thus, we should do it this way in order to argue her case. Let's go on and talk a little bit about ethos. This is a credibility-building piece by